Should Nigel Farage make a political comeback? Get your calls in for this now. According to a top Tory, Lee Anderson, Farage does a great job, and if he were to become leader of Reform UK, the party would be a huge threat in the next general election. Now, at the moment, Farage is an honorary president of Reform and is said to be weighing up whether or not to lead the party. But do you agree that Farage would or should make a return to politics? Belinda, I'm going to start with you because I think you're quite a fan of Farage.
I am a fan of Farage. I first met him when I was 19, many decades ago, and I was a student at university. And the only way girls could get rugby tickets to games back then was I was selling programmes and I got to watch half the game. So outside Twickenham, he had his little stall set up. This was about in 95, showing my age now.
Don't worry, you look gorgeous, you're all right, babe.
And we just started getting talking, and he started telling me, the young need to understand what the EU's about and democracy and how sovereignty is so important. Anyway, everything he said came true. Everything he told me ended up happening, and he has had the courage of his conviction about the importance of democracy for the UK for decades and has never wavered. And at a time now where there feels like there's a lot of chaos, we need conviction politicians, not the flip-flopping of Keir and Sunak. People don't know where they stand with the political leaders of today. I think we need a conviction politician to come back. I think he would make an excellent contribution.
He's still trying to attract those younger voters, so that hasn't changed. That's maintained. He went on to the I'm a Celebrity, get me out of here, in order to get more of those young supporters. Do you think it would be a good thing to bring him back into politics? Would you be excited to see him in the political sphere?
So I'll lead with the latter part of your question. Will I be excited to see him? No. Sorry, Belinda, I do like you, but no. But in terms of could he make a comeback, should he make a comeback, I do, just being honest in terms of being diplomatic, he represents a decent cohort within our society, a proportion of our society that believe in democracy, do not want to see people or leaders flip-flopping, want to see consistency in terms of their stance. Does Nigel Farage represent that, being diplomatic and fair? Yes, he does. But he is not aligned with my personal values.
What is it you don't like about Nigel Farage then? Why would you not want to see him back in politics?
Well, it's the whole immigration stance, isn't it? So I think for me, the two things that really resonated, I remember reading two articles that were disconcerting, to say the least. First was years ago. I think it was, I don't even want to say the newspaper just in case if I get it wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was like something like The Guardian. Okay. That did admit that there was a statement from his school teachers that basically said that Nigel Farage is a bigot and a racist, and he was about anywhere between the age of 16 and 18. His teachers, his school teachers, wrote an actual statement. It's classified, it's evidence. We can find it on the internet if you Google now, that said, we believe young Nigel Farage
but people
is
change.
Racist. Yeah, no, hold on.
So even if that was to be true.
This was, all right, so let me finish. Beginning, racist and bigot. Now, 20, 30 years later, people are still saying what? Racist and bigot.
So the same racist and bigot all the time just for voting Brexit. The terms have been completely gutted by the left. Everyone gets called a racist, a bigot, every name. And I get called it just for simply voting Brexit. And I do think people can change. I also think in terms of immigration, I think the vast majority of the British public have rightfully justifiable concerns over open borders. Open borders is actually a very extreme position. It's very moderate and centrist to want to control the numbers who come into the country, depending on the infrastructure. And Nigel's only been very careful about wanting the numbers.
Can I just to kind of dispute you on that point? I do think that people can change, but I think it's very alarming, disconcerting when we talk about the fact that someone has been classified as a racist and
but
when they were young, and then they are also classified as a racist as they get older. Secondly, hold on, let me just finish.
Where is your evidence for what you're saying? You're saying he's being classified and people are calling him that, but you're not telling me what is causing people to call him that.
That's a very valid point. So I'll just remind me, I'm just going to finish Belinda's point. In terms of people changing, I think that's a really important factor to take into consideration. But at the same time, if they are perpetuating, this leads to your original point, if they are still perpetuating prejudice and bias that connects to the original title they were given, such as being a racist and bigot, we have a problem. So for me, I bring it back to, like most people, that picture of all of those brown people, right? You've seen it many times.
That picture is a correct, factual depiction of what is happening.
No,
but it wasn't.
Actually, it's not. It's actually not, because if we think about it now, we had a massive influx of European immigrants, and we didn't see a picture of all of these European people coming in. We saw a picture of black and brown people. So now it makes sense. But where was the picture from Nigel Farage of all of these white people coming into the country?
Imarn, I'm going to have to interject.
Sorry, yes, please.
Just if you can talk a little bit about that poster that we know that Farage stood in front of. That poster he was making out was of immigrants or asylum seekers coming into the UK. And it wasn't, was it? It was about asylum seekers elsewhere. It wasn't about the UK.
Well, the path to the UK is through the EU, and Merkel had opened the doors to a vast majority of men. The women and children were a tiny minority of the millions that came in. And I'd just ask you this, if it's just, you know, the bigots and the racists worrying about immigration, you know, at the moment, the EU is turning far more far right than the UK is.
It's not just.
And the reason is because there are people going, open the borders, and you're a racist and a bigot if you care about immigration. People care about cultural change. Not all cultures are the same. Some cultures are actually terrible for women, and it's quite nice if they're not imported into Europe, and people have the right to say that, and they don't become bigots for saying that. And I think it's important. It has the democratic consent of the people having huge immigration and cultural shifts to the country, and it's because people have stopped, people like me being able to talk about it without being called a racist, that you get the far right on the increase in the EU. It must be a free and open discussion about the impact of mass hyper-immigration on countries that do not want it.
Okay,
I'm not just going to dispute. I'm not going to dispute you on that, and I just want to add one more point. I do apologise.
I really need to get to the call.
I was just going to say extremism. That's what we're ultimately talking about. Extremism. I believe that Nigel Farage is an extremist, and the very thing that he condemns is the very thing that he is.
I think he's our hero, and the country needs him.
Leslie, Bristol. Our panellists have very different views. Where do you sit on this debate? Should Nigel Farage make a comeback? Would you be happy to see him in the political sphere? Leslie?
Oh, yes, hello.
What's your thoughts?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah. What's your thoughts?
He should come back, yes. I agree with his policies.
What is it you particularly like about him?
Pardon?
What do you particularly like about him?
I agree with him on immigration. I live in Bristol in the southwest. We have over 3,000 homeless people, and I feel we should be looking after our own first.
OK, so you would be happy to have him come back and lead reform. That could mean that the Tories lose the general election just because they'll lose votes on that basis. You're happy for that to happen too?
Absolutely.
All right, OK. Well, what would you say to counter Leslie's comment? She likes it because, you know, she's feeling the effects of immigration.
Like we all are. So Leslie is not unique in that particular dynamic. What I was going to say is when you mentioned, Leslie, you spoke about look after our own. Would you mind kind of adding some context to that statement, if you wouldn't mind, Leslie?
Well, I kids within Bristol, and there's loads of homeless people. I've been helping somebody who's sleeping rough. I've been giving him money, giving him food. And I feel that we should be looking after our own first. I'm not racist.
But what's our own? That's what I'm trying to get down to, Leslie. What when you say we should look after our own, what do you mean by that?
Well, our own people. They're the homeless people on the streets. I don't care if they're British but we should be sorting them out. There shouldn't be people sleeping rough on the streets.
So it's not about being British, it's about who's currently in the country and who is struggling. And if that's the case, then we could say that we should probably be looking after those that are trying to seek asylum in our country, right? Because those individuals, that particular cohort, is also struggling, and they are currently in our country. So if you're saying that our look after our own is simply about being in this country and struggling, well, that extends to those that are immigrants, no?
Yeah, but the Conservatives have done nothing. They're not sorting the problem out.
I agree with you on that one. I agree with you on that one, Leslie.
I think the point that Leslie is making is that we have a certain number of people already in the UK and we have stretched education systems. Our NHS is on its knees. Is this what you're sort of talking about, Leslie? There's already lots of homeless people that we can't find houses for. We've got a housing crisis.
Nigel Farage would do a good job.
How are we going to help other people that are seeking asylum in this country?
Well, it goes back to what Leslie said originally, the fact that Conservative Party have not done a good job. So I understand and appreciate why people advocate for a party like Reform, because they appear to be the alternative. But the reality is, let's just go back to the source of the problem. It is the neglect in terms of this government, in terms of prioritising things, organising things, rectifying issues within our country, as to why we have got to the point where we are now deciding to be divisive and talk about immigrants as if they are a huge...
blame.
Right, okay. The reality is also that the British taxpayer is not an all-you-can-eat buffet for the world to feed on.
I agree.
And this idea that the British taxpayer, and I'm talking nurses, doctors, firemen, their salary is going to get less and less because we have to sort out everyone who's suffering in the world, no matter how compassionately we feel about them.
That's an extremist view.
I know. I absolutely agree with Leslie. I think we should 100% look after our own first. Those people who are in the country, we need to get them jobs. The housing list, the waiting list for people already is crazy. We cannot.
But you can't stop those individuals. But I agree with you. I agree with you.
Cap the asylum at 20,000 a year maximum until we've got the infrastructure to help our own first.
So what do you do with those individuals that are currently coming through, whether that be via truck, boat, or legal?
Okay, if they come
migration?
from the safety of France, absolutely send them back to the safety of France.
Okay.
They're not asylum seekers if they come from a safe country, in my opinion.
We're getting stuck on immigration here. I wonder whether that is the only thing. No, it's an interesting thing. Every time you bring up Farage, people bring up immigration, and I wonder whether that is the only thing that potentially he has going for him. Maybe there's other things. Chris from Manchester, would you be happy to see Farage back in the political world?
Firstly, Storm, love the hair.
Thank you.
So do I.
Thank you. Cheers,
yes,
Chris.
I would. Now, the problem is people do get stuck on immigration with Nigel Farage. When you listen to Richard Tice, he's got some very, very interesting stats about climate change and why, and even Tony Blair, somebody called him Sir, unbelievably, but still, why Tony Blair has even said that it's folly for us to even be bothered in the West, the way we are, particularly Britain, about climate change when China and India are building 300 power stations.
OK, what's this got to do with Farage? Bring this back to Farage quickly for me, Chris.
Right, OK. Well, Farage would stop this. He'd stop the green taxes, which are just meaningless. It's just another tax. He would run a lot fairer system, I believe, and he's patriotic. Fundamentally, he's patriotic.
He is.
Can I just say something? First. Can I just add something? Chris, thank you so much for your point, and I do agree with it to an extent. I just wanted to say that ultimately what I'm hearing is that our decisions are based off of other people's decisions. So basically we have no accountability for our own selves and we kind of are reactive. So if everything is going right, then we can react accordingly. That's what I'm hearing in terms of climate change. You talk about China and other countries. I'm assuming you're talking about China. Other countries doing far worse in regards to combating climate change. And so what you're ultimately saying, what I'm hearing, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that because other people are doing worse, we don't really need to do anything. So our policies in Britain should be, if other countries are doing worse things than we are, then we're okay.
That's just
we're good.
Hold on,
we don't need to do much.
I want
That's
Chris
what I'm
to
hearing,
respond
Chris.
to that.
No.
So, Chris, should we not be a world leader when it comes to greener energy? Would that not be a good thing, a good look for us, at least on the global stage?
Sorry, are you asking me now?
Yes.
I didn't say that, by the way. And secondly, no, why should we be the world leader?
OK, I'll explain to you why, Chris. When we go back to the immigration thing, we want to have more control over our borders. Well, if we let climate change run loose, then we're going to have a lot more displaced people, a lot more people coming and trying to seek asylum
vicious cycle.
In our country. And then you've got yourself an even bigger problem on that front.
Hang on. What has climate change got to do with immigration?
Well, because places get flooded and people lose their homes over climate change and weather disasters and flooding and droughts and fires. And so when people lose their homes, they tend to look for somewhere else to seek asylum, and sometimes that's Britain.
Right, and why isn't it the East? Why do Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Middle East, other than rich people that go to Dubai and Qatar, why do they not seek sanctuary in places like Russia and India and China?
Because they've got a choice and they want to come here.
Well, don't get.
Well, don't.
I agree with you.
So in other words, those Eastern countries don't give them a choice.
Listen, Chris, I neither agree or disagree. I'm just posing the alternative position here. If you are wanting to let climate crisis run riot, then you're going to have a bigger immigration problem on your hands, and you seem to be okay with that?
If you want to re-globalise the world, Storm, then everybody has to join in. And my issue is, I didn't mention immigration, by the way. I didn't start off with that.
No, I did.
But now you've brought me onto that. I think the world, if it's really serious about growing or changing the total imbalance of society, which I do agree with, as long as people do their bit, I don't understand why it's always the West that have to. I never hear of the East taking in thousands and thousands of asylum seekers. Why is that?
Well, can I add something?
Yes.
Thank you, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you, Chris. So I just wanted to say it's really interesting for me when I hear what your kind of sentiment. I understand it. I genuinely understand it. It's like, why is the West having to deal with all of this stuff? Why can't other countries or other parts of the world deal with these big issues? Why is it always England? Why is it always America? Why is it always the West? Well, okay. My personal theory is due to the fact that these are the things that we pride ourselves on as being British. If you think about conservative values, one of which is being or having mutual respect for different faiths and beliefs. That's an actual British value. It's a conservative value. It's actually stated everywhere. You can find it all over the internet. Okay, that's why I know it. Okay, mutual respect.
What's this got to do with
beliefs? Hold on. There are other parts of the world backing up what you just said earlier on. It's not about climate change. It's about understanding why we end up having to kind of brunt that burden, have that burden in terms of immigration and climate change, etc. And the reason why, again, when we talk about immigration, British values. So what I'm basically saying is the things that we pride ourselves on are the very things that we get upset about when people also agree.
I'm going to move on.
But
Chris, thank you very much for your call. You would love to see Farage back because he would take a different stance on green policies. Susan from Lancashire, what do you think about Farage making a comeback? Would you be happy to see him?
Well, personally, we live in a democratic country, and I suppose if people want to vote for him, they have a right to do it.
Yeah.
But Nigel Farage reminds me of Enoch Powell's speeches in the 60s.
Why?
And the riots that followed.
Yeah.
We do have a problem with immigration, but tone the language down.
Thank you, Susan.
I work in the health service, and we wouldn't have a health service if it wasn't for overseas workers and many other public services. My husband worked as a doctor for 40 years in this country, came from India, and in recent years, before he passed away, we were getting comments, obscene comments about immigration.
Oh, Susan,
so just remember that.
I'm sad to hear that, but you make a point about the language that Farage uses, and Belinda, I'm going to throw that one to you. Is there an argument to say sometimes his language is quite inflammatory?
I have not heard anything that has made me feel like I won't vote for him because he's used such awful, shocking language. I think he speaks very plain and simply to the average Brit about and reflecting a lot of the concerns. And it is because people have felt so utterly censored over immigration, like you can't mention it, otherwise you're going to be called a bigot, that when someone does finally say something about it, that there's all this sort of fear and worry that it's like Nazi Germany or like Enoch Powell. It's just not right. I've known him for decades. He led the most diverse party in the European Parliament. Blacks, whites, browns, gays, straight, Muslims, Christians. We were the most diverse party. Do you think any one of them would have had Nigel as a leader if they thought he was
diverse diversity is not a prerequisite for equality.
I'm just saying that when I used to campaign with Nigel, going along the streets all up and down England, people would come out of all colours, both sexes, and hug him. The idea that just because you're an immigrant or descended from an immigrant, therefore you believe in open borders, is ridiculous. There are many immigrants who think there are too many people in this country, many immigrants who want school places for their children as well. It's not just a right versus left thing. And Nigel getting rid of net zero, UK reform, all these policies, I am afraid to say it's decent, average, moderate Brits who want decent centrist policies, which is what Nigel and Reform UK
I'm going to have to wrap up, but very quickly.
To go. Okay, so I'll just say this very quickly. I think that, in all honesty, Belinda, genuinely, I think you are leading with your own positive discrimination towards Nigel Farage due to the fact that you've known him for a very long time. So you have a certain amount of bias when it pertains to him and his policies. Secondly, in terms of immigration, I think the reason why we bring it back to this kind of extremist stance is because it is rooted in extreme language, which connects to prejudice,
what he said.
bias.
Just give me evidence.
I'll give you one. Okay, so I don't
racist.
like. So I read something on again, I can't remember the newspaper. I do apologise. This is a quote. I do not like hearing foreign languages on the train. Okay, that was a quote, a direct quote. Now, hold on a second. It's prejudicial and biased.
It's quite anti-multiculturalism.
And bias.
I'm going to have to move. I'm going to have to move on there. We'll have to see what Nigel decides to do. So I'm sure we'll bring you that news as soon as it breaks.